Movement, a very important part of all sports and martial arts. Today we're going to discuss how to understand fighting movements in the martial arts in a part 1 of our series. Stay tuned. Welcome to Shihan's Dojo. I'm Shihan Marty Husband, and I want to talk to you today about movement in fighting. Let us assume a few things, that we've got an opponent coming directly straight on to us so that we can at least have a basis of where to start. We'll basically call it the direction of attack. We have to assume at this point that the direction of attack is always coming in front of us so that we can better explain movements in fighting. We're not going to talk basically about stances here because that's a whole other thing altogether for which is the best fighting stance to be in and all that there. It's a whole different strategy and tactic we might talk about some other time. First we'll assume a few things, that we're in a 50-50 weighted stance, that we're in a phasic position where our knees are basically over the front of our foot and like over our toe or base of our toe area. Now movement itself is important because it allows us to move around and apply our strategy and tactics when we're trying to handle an opponent. In part 1 of this series we're just going to understand what the basic directions of the movements are. Later on I'll do another video on the combinations of these movements and how they're put together for flowing, and then possibly another one later on strategy and tactics with movements and how to use them. The first thing we're going to talk about is called the intrusive movement. It's basically a forward or advancing movement. This is usually done very aggressively to get into the opponent quickly, whether to set up a combination or where you're trying to go head on with the opponent straight in. Since it's aggressive by nature, it tends to be a little more offensive than defensive. However, it can be used for blocking. It's just basically to get inside and close the distance between you and your opponent, or take away the distance. The next one we're going to talk about is receptive, or backwards or retreating is what you want to call it. Receptive is basically used a lot of different ways in many styles. In karate it can be a block, or it can be getting ready for a spring to get into an intrusive type of an attack or something. And in Jiu-Jitsu and Aikido they can be using it to control the opponents by taking them in a direction that they may want them to go or whatever, to set them up for the next movement. Again, it's all based on strategy and tactics of what is trying to be done there. Like I said, this type of a movement tends to be very passive for blocking and countering, springing, trapping the opponent, trying to get them to pull in. There's a lot to it, so we'll cover those in strategies again later. In a martial arts type of situation, it can be used by drawing somebody in, pulling them towards you so you can get a good spring forward to attack and go into an intrusive method. Now receptive can also be for block and counter like we said, or basically just control the action of what's going on with the opponent. Now a person would never want to go backwards too fast and keep going, and that'll give the opponent from that direction of an attack more of a speed up and possibly get in on you quicker. So it's usually strategic if you're going to do it that way. Next we'll talk about oblique angles here. Oblique angles are basically 45 degrees up or to the right or left, or 45 degrees right or left to the back side of you in a straight line. These are always used as a tactical advantage. They're very precise and often lead into another type of movement, or combine a different type of movement in with the techniques that they're using. Now this one can be very passive and aggressive, so there's a lot of reasons to use this type of an angle, and we'll cover that later when we talk about combinations of movements in another video. Depending on where you're going with the oblique, if you're moving forward, it's usually more intrusive and then more receptive if you go off on an angle. That's not to say again you're not attacking or anything like that, but it just depends on which oblique angle you're going. It can also give you a more precise way of setting up a technique or controlling to the next movement. Oblique angles tend to just help lead up to that there, or gain the advantage to the side of the opponent. It's also dependent on the direction you're going, whether you're going forward aggressive, or if you want to call it intrusive oblique, or you can call it receptive oblique. It doesn't matter how you look at it. This is always an excellent setup for doing your next strategical movement or attack that you're going to use. The next one we're going to talk about is called reflexive, or parallel sliding. But reflexive action is oftentimes used more than any of the others. It's not necessarily on a full 90-degree plane to the right or the left, or parallel sliding as we call it, but it's that general direction, and that's where you might lead up with a control or an attack or whatever. It's very passive and aggressive in and of itself, so it can be used for, offensive, defensive natures. More often than not, it is also a setup for a combination of movements. The last one we're going to talk about is circle left and circle right. Again, like the oblique, they can go forward or they can go backwards in a circle. Basically, it's taking your lead leg in a circle, either in front of you or behind you, or vice versa. The rear leg goes circles to the left or circles to the right. It's all dependent on your footwork, your positioning, and everything that goes into it. Very much a strategical one, and it's often used as a secondary movement. There are ways to use it as a primary movement, but most people will use it when they're in combination. More often than not, the lead leg is used in circling to the right or left if going forward. If you're going to the rear leg is usually the one that's going to circle right or left. It just depends on the situation and what's going on, but it's a general direction. The lead leg in this type of a thing tends to be a little more precise on getting a circle to the left or circle to the right if you use it as a primary. And the rear leg tends to be, if it's used, tends to be for more of an aggressive attack. If you go out and look at some of the charts out there for like Kempo, Jiu-Jitsu, all these different charts out there, you'll see the foot patterns can look very simple to very complicated. The truth of the matter is, it is very simple. However, just like you're fighting, and when you're fighting, you're punching and kicking in combinations, your movements can be used in combination too. And these combinations can become complicated. We'll try to cover that real soon in another video so you can understand these combinations and how they work together. The footwork necessary for this type of an operation is of paramount. You have to understand what you're doing with your feet. If you don't understand what you're doing with your feet, then these movements are nothing but an exercise. Of course, you need to exercise these patterns to figure out what's going on, but study some of the techniques you've been learning. See where you're actually getting the forward action, or the intrusive action as we call it, the receptive action, the reflexive, which ones are oblique angles, which ones are circle to the left, circle to the right. You'll be surprised when you see how many combinations there are in there. This allows you to understand flowing into the next movements and how to get there and where your feet positions are. It teaches you how to handle somebody who's opposite foot compared to what you are, right, if you're right, they have a right foot forward, you have a left foot forward, or vice versa. It's just all dependent, and understanding these movements will lead up to some very important strategy and tactics that you have to consider when training. But in understanding this base movement, you can now take it to an advanced step further. So that's what we'll be doing some other time here real soon. So take this into consideration. Put it in your repertoire. Follow the charts you saw off to the side here. If you find this video helpful, like it down there, share it with your friends, let them know about Shihan's Dojo. And if you're here for the first time, jab that subscribe button and punch the bell so we can notify you when we have new videos. And also leave a comment down there. Tell us the things you'd like to see or what you'd like to talk about. Maybe information that you need to help you to make decisions. That's what we're here for. And again, thank you for your valuable time.